Welcome to all of you in attendance this evening. My name is Mr. Hugh, right? And together with me tonight, we have Miss Eating, and we're both from the Eaton Academy, right? And tonight we're going to present a webinar to you entitled Secrets to Acing the Exams. Okay, so when we say secrets to acing the exams, basically it's not some special code that you can use to instantly get your kids to get full marks for exams. No, it's not. I don't think such a thing exists. If it did, that'd be great, but it doesn't. But what we are going to talk about is how we can actually help and how you can help your children to be really prepared to do well for their exams. Okay, so these are the things we're going to talk about, and there are quite a few things we have to share this evening. So thank you once again for joining us this evening for this webinar. So once more, for those who just came in, you can communicate with us through the Q&A or the chat tab, right, which you should be able to see. And we will try to answer your questions as soon as we can. And if you require a more in-depth answer, then you please bear with us. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. All right. Okay, so let's get right into it. Secrets to acing the exams. Okay. What is the secret? Eating. Any top tips to start us off?
Hi everyone, good evening. Thanks for joining us. All this time in all my years of teaching, I think the biggest secret is the collaboration between teachers, parents, and students.
Yeah, totally agree with you, all right? Because we've all heard that saying, it takes a village, right? It really does. You can't just depend on one person for, to guide your child to success. It takes a whole host of people, and very important, parents. Very important. Okay, so yeah, we're going to talk about that in a bit. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so firstly, let us know if you can hear us loud and clear. Maybe if you could just do a reaction, like a thumbs up or something, or better still, oh, thank you very much. Better still, if you have anything to say or ask, you can just type in the chat as well. Right? Thank you very much. Yes, AC, thank you. Okay, let's move on. Give me a second, please. Oops, what am I doing here? Okay. Okay, here we go. Right. Okay. Now, the first tip or the first thing that I think everyone needs to think about is basically, what is your child being tested on, right? You need to understand the syllabus. Okay. So different subjects, you have different key topics, right? Know what is going to be tested. Okay. I've been teaching for many years, all right, and sometimes it's quite appalling to me when the child comes up to me and says, "Oh, I actually didn't know what was going to come up for the test." Okay, why it's appalling is because they should know. Teachers already will tell them what's coming out, right? What are the different topics? Yeah. Okay. For example, for English, they will know, oh, if it's a WA, if it's on, let's say, composition writing, they know it's writing. Or if it's a paper 2, then they know, oh, what different components in paper 2? Is it comprehension? Is it closed passage? Things like that, right? So they need to know what's going to come out first and foremost, right? That's really important. Okay, so if, let's say, your child is going to sit for an exam, check with the teacher. They should tell the children what is expected of them for the exam. Okay, so that's the first thing, very important. Now, the other thing, of course, is for anyone to, make sense of what the exams are going to, what they're going to see in the exams. What they can do is they can actually analyze past papers, right? I believe that our attendees here should be familiar with things in the past, like what we call the 10-year series, 10-year series or 5-year series. So why do we have those things? It's basically to understand what the exam looks like, okay? And then from there, we can actually look for patterns. We can look for the types of questions that keep coming out. So for example, I'll give you a good example here for English. By the way, I'm an English teacher, so I'm going to use lots of English language examples, okay? Eating will cover the maths questions. So for English, very common, especially in the upper primary, for synthesis and transformation, there is going to be a question on converting direct speech to reported speech. You know, almost every single year for the PSLE, there's one question like that. Okay, so you can already guess, you know that, okay, this is definitely going to come out. Be familiar with how to do that conversion from a direct speech to reported speech, right? Now, the same, I guess, could be said for other subjects as well. Eating, do you have any particular recurring question that you constantly see in exams for maths?
Oh, in mathematics, it's always with the word problems. And I mean, later on, we're going to share a little bit of our TA secret about how we help the children.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm curious in English, how would they spot a pattern? And even after they spot a pattern, how would they prepare for it?
Right. So this, just like what you said earlier, right? When, for example, if I go back to the same example of converting direct speech to indirect speech, they will know the rules that are needed for conversion. Okay. So once they're familiar with that, okay, then they know, oh, I have to change the tenses, I have to change the place words and things like that. So they know how to prepare. Okay. Other patterns perhaps could be like, for example, in grammar, right? In grammar, or yeah, in grammar, they know that definitely there will be a question testing on subject-verb agreement. You can see it, it's every year, it's going to be like that, okay? So these are the things that you can see, and you can be pretty guaranteed that these types of questions will come out, yeah? Later on, we'll talk about question analysis as well. So maybe we can get a little more in depth when we come to that, yeah? The other thing, of course, is time management. Now, this is really important, especially for those students who are doing the sit-down exam for the first time. Yeah. Nowadays, it's only in primary 3 that, you know, they actually sit down for a full paper. And before that, you know, they have what we call weighted assessment. So these are like smaller chunks of the paper. But at the end of the year, there's a full paper. And especially when it comes to full papers, managing time is really important. They should actually think about how much time they're going to devote to each part of the paper. Okay, the last thing the student would want is to run out of time, especially since we know that the more difficult sections come towards the end. And if they don't have enough time for that, obviously that's going to affect them quite badly. Yeah. So managing time is really important. Yes, Eating.
Sorry, Hugh, I have a question because
Yeah.
so Hugh is an English teacher and I'm a mathematics teacher.
Mm.
So for our P3s and P4s, you know, this could be the first time they're sitting for an exam. And I have a different experience from Hugh. So in my mathematics paper, actually the experience that I face is the children tend to rush through their paper. They finish really early, and then when we get the paper back, it's just full of careless mistakes. So I'm curious, is this also a thing with English?
Yes, okay. I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, so when I gave the example of not having enough time, but there is the opposite as well, where like you said, they rush through the paper, and especially so for English because they feel that, oh, you know, I'm just gonna go through it. It's English, I don't have to think too much, right? I'm just gonna do it, and then they end up with lots of spare time, and then they don't make full use of that spare time. So one component of time management is also time to check work, right? So I always tell students, you know, there's a reason why they give you this amount of time to complete the paper. If you feel that, hey, wait a minute, why do they give me 1.5 hours when I only needed like maybe 45 minutes, right? There's a reason for that because they want you to actually go through the paper carefully and check for errors. And trust me when I say that, when you tell students to check for errors, 9 out of 10 times, right, they will be able to pick up things on their own, right? They will be able to see, oh yeah, hang on, I made a mistake here, all right? So this is actually time spent well on checking for errors, okay? So there's something else that it would come under time management as well. So they have to account for that, yeah? So yeah, I hope that answered your question, Eating. Okay, let's move on to the next bit. Now, this is something that, I mean, as parents, you can probably help as well. It's important that the students have a regular or a daily routine, right? A regular study schedule. Now, why is that so? It's just like with everything else, right? If let's say you want to go on an exercise program, for example, you know, it makes more sense if every morning, for example, then you do your exercise before going to work, right? So it becomes a routine. It becomes something that maybe at first it might be a bit difficult, but over time it gets easier and easier, and then it becomes just part of your life, right? So it's important that students treat it that way as well. Have a study schedule, make it consistent. Like let's say every day from this time to this time, I'm going to cover this subject, perhaps, right? And yeah, after a while, it just becomes habit, right? And when something becomes habit, it becomes easy, you know? The reason why it's important to consistently do that is that when students are facing an exam, all right, it's always the one of the worst things is to do last minute revision. Okay. So all the students who do well in their exams always say the same thing. They say, oh, it's because I do regular revision, right? Because you can't expect to cram so much information at the very last minute, right? So if they are regularly revising, have a daily routine, right? Make it something that is so natural to them that they even forget what they're doing. They forget the fact that, oh, this is actually studying. No, it's a habit, right? If they get into that rhythm, okay, tackling exams shouldn't be an issue at all. Okay. So if they don't already have a study schedule, I would recommend, okay, parents maybe help them come up with one, all right, and try to stick to that. Okay. Now the other thing, of course, is um, try to have a bit of variety in terms of the subjects, perhaps, or maybe even the method in which they are revising. Okay. So again, we'll talk a little more about that later on. Okay. Why is basically just to keep interest. Okay. I know many students get so sick and tired of all revision time, and then they start moaning and groaning, right? But what we can do to help, right, is to add some variety. Okay. So perhaps changing the subjects, or maybe again, like I said, the mode of revision, that really would help. Okay. Yes, let me just continue from here. Okay. So now the other thing, of course, is as they are revising, it's good to practice what we call active learning techniques. Yeah. So note taking is another essential skill that well, I mean students and I mean as adults too, you know, this is what we do. It helps us to remember things, right? So various ways you can do that. You know, you can create bullet points, right, to condense you know, lots of information, highlighting key concepts and terms to make them stand out. So when we talk about highlighting, especially, that's also one of the techniques that we use at TEA when we're analyzing questions. Okay, so this is something that students would definitely find easy to do. Another possible way of remembering, especially when it comes to like lots of different information, is to come up with like mind maps and diagrams. Yeah. So visual representation can also help. Okay. I would say this is especially useful for things like concepts in science, perhaps. Yeah. Having mind maps, you know, with associated like for example, if I talk about life cycle, then maybe I can think about all the different terms associated with life cycle, right? So that's how you kind of like organize information. So having mind maps or even drawing diagrams, that is also pretty useful as well. Yeah. Eating, anything to add here?
Uh, for mathematics,
Yeah.
I think just now you mentioned, because we're on active learning techniques. So for mathematics, it's good if the students can make a list and then they can compare all the different methods they can use and then see which method or approach can address the different concepts. And I mean, just as Hugh was sharing, and then he mentioned science, and then he asked me about mathematics, I'm curious about English.
Yeah.
What kind of visual representations could the children use to help them in their revision?
Right. So one thing that we do here as well is we use mind maps, right? Especially when it comes to writing. So sometimes when we go through writing lessons, we tend to brainstorm quite a bit in terms of um, phrases that they can use, especially when it comes to things like using show not tell phrases. So, like for example, if we come up with an emotion, let's say fear, right? Okay, how can we represent fear in a show not tell phrase? So basically, how do we show that fear in our writing? So we come up with brainstorm all kinds of phrases. We can put that in a form of a mind map as well, and all this can be actually copied down into a notebook. And when it comes to revision, they can just flip through with their regular revision, and really after a while they'll just remember how to describe all the different emotions really easily, and they'll use it in their writing. And all this really will help in their writing scores. Yeah. Okay. Right. So let's move on from here. Okay, now this again, in relation to regular revision, practice. I think everyone knows, right? Practice makes perfect, and really, that's really true. Sometimes students come up to me and they go like, "Oh, this is really difficult," and then I'll just say, "Yeah, it's difficult until it becomes easy, right?" So how does it become easy? It's basically being familiar and practicing. So again, when we say practice, we need to also be specific. Yeah. So if let's say there is some specified topics that need more attention, maybe focus on those first. Okay. Um, Also, as I mentioned earlier, try to be a bit creative as well. Use different sources, right? Use online resources, or maybe other workbooks, or practice worksheets and stuff like that. Because again, we don't want to make the learning or the practice boring, basically, right? Because the last thing we want to do is to kill the interest for our students as well, right? Okay. So again, when I talk about practice and I'm talking about specific exercises, for English, I can say that, okay, let's say this student has trouble with um comprehension close, right? That's where they fill in words in the blanks, right? Their own words, right? So a good way is really to practice doing comprehension close. And when they do that, when they do these practices, right, they'll realize certain language features, right? So they'll know that, oh, when it's a comprehension close, it's usually going to be like a non-fiction text. So some of the wordings in non-fiction text will be different from narratives, right? Because narratives, it could be many, many different words, but non-fiction is usually quite focused, right? And also the skills in determining the answers. So that all requires practice for them to recognize these things. Yeah. Yi-Ting, do you have anything to add for daily practice?
Actually, I have a question for all our parents, because
Hmm.
when it comes to the exam period, I think a huge struggle is we are practicing everywhere. We're practicing
Yeah.
in school, we're practicing at home, and when it comes to the exam period, especially with the kids who have SA2s now, our P3s, our P4s, and P5s,
Yes.
I just have stacks and stacks of
Hmm.
marking to get
Hmm.
through. So I'm curious, parents at home, um, you know, after 5 hours in school, the children come home, they could be sick and tired of writing. And,
Yeah.
do you all have any tips to overcome that? And I wonder if you'd like to try my suggestion. So sometimes when the kids come to class and they are over practiced, they are overtired, and they just look at the question, they're overwhelmed. How do
Hmm.
we get them to practice even
Yeah.
just their thinking? So sometimes I give them a break and let them just talk through the answers. So they'll say, first, I'll find one unit, and then from one unit, I'll draw this model, and then I'll do this, I'll do that. And so I find that sometimes such practice could also be helpful. So parents, if you guys have any suggestion, please feel free to share it with us. Or,
Hmm.
I mean, do you think, practice through speaking helps with English?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when it comes to languages, especially practice in all areas, like speaking, writing, even listening for that matter, right? All this requires practice because the more you immerse yourself in that language, the more you use the language, the better you'll be, right? Yeah. So like I like what Ethan was mentioning about, the struggle of like getting, students to practice, to keep doing the exercises after a long day at school and things like that. So I guess that also kind of leads into what we're going to talk about later about well-being of students, right? So we have to think of that as well. And also that's why I mentioned earlier about changing the mode, right? Sometimes it's good to add a bit of variety in the way that they do their practices. If you're gonna give your child like 100 worksheets that all look the same, I don't think anyone enjoys that, right? So it's good to have variety of sources as well. And again, at Eton Academy, we try our best to do that as well. We have all kinds of different modes of practice and instruction as well. Okay, right. Let's move on to the next bit. Okay, so yeah, in line with that, right? So mock test. Now, again, I considering that there might be students who are facing an exam for the very first time, it's important that they understand what it means to take an exam. Okay, so exam conditions, right? They need to be used to sitting for like, let's say, up to 2 hours doing an exam. Okay, and how do we do that? So let's say you want them to do a practice paper at home, for example. Make sure that the environment is quiet, time it, right? Time it. This is just to mimic exam conditions. Now, again, this is something that you can do, but you don't have to do it all the time, but at least give them that experience so that when it comes to the exam, they know what to expect. I think all of us know that we get nervous, we get we get very maybe even afraid when we don't know what's coming, right? So by giving them this experience, they know, okay, it's going to be like that, right? Then it helps them. Okay, it helps to calm their nerves as well. Yeah. Also, doing the mock test on its own, right? I mean, it's important that we review, right? We need to review and, more importantly, figure out where we went wrong. Okay, understanding how or why we made certain mistakes. Okay, so that's the second part of it. I mean, I know that some parents don't have the time, so they go like, oh, okay, just do this, then I'll just mark it. Okay, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. Okay, why do you make so many mistakes? Okay, the important thing here is to understand. The question is really why, right? So why do you make the mistake? Figure out why. Yeah? Don't just ask the kid why, because the kid won't be able to tell you why. Right? So again, we have to think about this. We have to think about how we analyze our mistakes as well. Now, again, I mentioned earlier, I mean, parents are very busy. Sometimes they might not, I mean, you might not have the know-how even. Like if you look at a certain question, you might not know what is actually being tested here. So this is where it's important to go back to teachers, all right? Whether in school or whether like, at a place like Eton Academy where you can come in and ask, and the feedback is really important, right? The feedback on how your child has done or what's the mistake, that's actually very important. Okay. Okay, and this comes, yeah, this is in line with what I said earlier, right? So analyze the errors, okay? Understand why they were incorrect. And of course, the focus is on understanding what went wrong and what is the right way to do it. Okay, I think that's really important. So all these practices that they do before the final exam, all those are learning opportunities for them. Okay, so that when it comes to the final exam at the end of the year, they are ready for it. Okay, again, being prepared for the final exam. That's really important. Yeah. Ethan, would you like to add anything from there?
I'm also thinking about how they review and reflect, especially in
Yeah.
mathematics.
Yeah.
So I think something very common in mathematics is after they make a mistake and then they look at their working, a lot of my children will tell me, so I should subtract instead, or should I just change the division to
Mm,
multiplication and stuff like that. So I mean, from that perspective, it is mathematics, but they are not actually learning. They are still guessing,
yeah.
and yeah, they're they've basically just reduced the number of guesses from 4 to 3 because there are
Yes.
4 questions and yeah.
Correct. Yeah, yeah. So that's why the explanation is really important as well. I mean, like seeing I mean, from a teacher's point of view, right? I'm sure you think you agree with this. If you're able to analyze the errors of a student, you would be able to point out what exactly is this misconception or what is this thing that this child that is unaware of, right? So for example, I'll give you another example here. Subject verb agreement is something that many students make mistakes with, especially when your subject is not so clear, like whether it's a singular or a plural subject, right? So immediately, if there's when they do these questions and make a mistake, right? I can tell, oh, is it because this child doesn't realize that, for example, if I say everyone, that is going to be a singular subject because they think everyone is more than one, right? It's plural, right? But what they learn at our center and in school as well is that when you treat everyone, everybody, these kinds of words, we treat it as singular subject. So that's why they get it wrong because they will choose a plural verb instead of a singular verb, right? So that analysis is really important. And once you identify that misconception or the thing that they don't know, then that's how we can work on that weakness, area of weakness. Yeah. Okay, let's just move on from here. Okay, so again, as I also mentioned earlier, it's important to seek help when needed. Okay. Encourage students to ask questions in class or during other lessons as well. I think this is also something that we should tell our children, right? Tell them to ask questions, not to be afraid to ask questions. This is a skill that I think we need to kind of remind them. Okay, I know some students. I've had students before who are like really, really very quiet. They have no questions. When teachers go like, okay, so is there any question you need to ask? Totally silent. You know, everything looks good. But when you get back, when we look at the work, then we realize that, oh, actually they didn't understand, right? So I think even from home, asking questions is a good habit to develop in our children. Okay, it's important. It's an important life skill. I feel as well. Yeah, and also of course if there's added material that you need or added explanations, again, feel free to go and check with teachers. I know that in school, sometimes teachers might be kind of busy, they don't have the time for students. It's a bit hard sometimes, but there are other ways to speak to teachers as well. For example, like coming to an enrichment center like us, right? So for us, we devote time to students. When we have questions, we spend time clarifying their doubts as well. Yeah. Okay, let me just move on from here. Okay, and that leads into the next bit about tuition and study groups. Yeah. Peer learning. Now, again, students sometimes, if they're on their own, right, they are only limited to what they see or what they are exposed to, right, on their own. But if they're in a group, their learning is really expanded because now they don't just learn on their own, they learn from other people as well. So study groups or tuition classes as well, right? Okay, it's really good because it really expands their base. I've just today, I had a student just randomly come in and share a fact about orcas, and he went like, oh, orcas are actually dolphins. And then the other two students like, no, they're whales, right? Orcas are whales, right? They're killer whales. And then he was like, no, they're actually dolphins. And true enough, they're dolphins. So this kind of learning, right? Sometimes it comes incidentally, and being in a group or a study group or like a tuition class like this really would expand their knowledge base. So I think it's really good for the entire group of children there. Yep. Okay. Right. Ethan, maybe you would like to talk about this one?
Okay. Could I share my screen, please?
Sure. Let me stop my share. Okay.
Hi parents, just a minute please as I'm getting everything up.
Mm.
Okay, there you go. Okay, should be able to see now. So thanks for hanging out till now. So thanks you for everything that you shared. So I just have a little bit more to add on. I think when it comes to exam revision, it's sometimes hard to remember that the children are human beings too.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, especially as teachers, when we meet a child, we are very obsessed with their roles as students and
Mm.
what they need to do in the classroom and how they need to perform in an exam setting so that they can get certain grades. But I've also come to realize that, you know, when we take care of things outside of the classroom for them, they also tend to learn better and enjoy their learning more and naturally do better in their exam.
Yep.
So and I think this helps to reduce stress for everyone if they just keep themselves healthy and go and sit for their exams at a regular time. Because um, with schools, sometimes if they're on MC on the day of their paper, then they need to go for special arrangement. It just creates extra stress and
Yeah.
it extends the period that, you know, they are under stress because their papers are being pushed back. So, you know, having a balanced diet and well, I think besides having a balanced diet, when they're not having such a great day, it's also important for them to have a bit of a cheat meal, you know, and eat foods that they like. Yeah, and then naturally, it's really tough when the children come to class tired. They are
Yeah.
always yawning and you know they're not at their best to absorb. So getting enough sleep is really important. And even if it's they're not asleep, getting that rest, you know, that time when they're just in bed and winding down from the day, um, I think that helps to moderate their their whole experience of learning.
Mm.
Yeah. And then naturally they can't be indoors all day. Like they need to go out, get some sun, you know, get some physical activities, run around like children do. And you know, these things, they're so small to us, but I think they make a huge difference to the children when we start to pay attention. Yeah. And then the next thing that I want to talk about is about them having a positive mindset. Uh so I think the stress of an exam gets to not just the children, but also uh us as adults, so parents and teachers. So it's easy for us to bear down on them, like, why do you get this wrong? We've already talked about this, you know, yeah, how can you have done that? You know, it's just addition and stuff like that. But when we get closer to the exam date, it's even more important to imbue the children with confidence
Mm.
and the feeling that we believe in them. Yeah, so I think something that I've learned to moderate throughout the year is at the start of the year when they're first joining us, and then naturally we're a lot more nurturing because it's the beginning of the year. You know, the P3s could be just like they're still in P2, and then they require a lot more hand holding. But towards the middle of the year, it's like we've already thought this before, how can you not know? And then now, right before the exam, it would be more like, it's okay, let me tell you again. Hopefully you'll remember next time. Yeah, so I think it's really important to make the children feel like and believe that they can achieve something. Yeah, and then we've actually found a video for as a little reminder when it gets away from us, how we can provide the encouragement and growth mindset to the children. And then I think all this ties back, it ties back to how we can be strategic in their revision and in their practice. So, for example, if they're having a bad day with their math or with their
Mm.
science,
Mm.
actually something that I like to do with the children is to just give them an MCQ practice.
Yep.
Yeah, so yeah, I think psychologically, you know, you provide some low-hanging fruits for the children to pick up. They feel better about themselves and their subjects that they are working on. And it just gives us a much more pleasant runway leading up to the exam
Yeah, if I may add as well. I mean, I totally agree with you about, on some days we just want to give them like maybe an MCQ practice, or even online quizzes, things like that, which really will make the kids more interested, because we know how kids are with devices and stuff, right? But that's where the challenge is to make use of these things to actually enrich their minds, and there are a variety of resources online as well, so to make it a little more fun for them, to make learning not be so boring in their eyes, right? And also on the thing about praising, I think that video, the link there, we're not going to show you the link, but please take a snapshot or yeah, have a look at this video. I think it's really interesting because it's questioning the way we praise our children as well. I think in many of us who have grown up over let's say, okay, I'm gonna say in the 80s or 90s, all right. The way our parents were praising us were largely our results. So if you did well, oh yeah, okay, great, you did well, right? So I think it's important to learn to praise for effort, right? More so than to praise results. Because when you praise effort, right, it encourages them to try even when they don't know, even when they find it difficult. If we just keep praising results, it kind of like makes them feel that, oh, if I get it wrong, I'm not going to get praised. So I'm not gonna even try. Okay, so there's a really good video that you can have a look at, and yeah, maybe ask yourself if you praise your children in that way as well. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, you think. Please continue.
Thank you. And in any case, we'll include the link to the video in our
Yeah.
email summary, so you can look
Mm.
forward to that. But moving on, so something else that we talk about, the secret that I shared right at the beginning of the video, where it's so important for parents, teachers, and children to work together.
Yeah.
Okay, so for parents, at home, I think this might differ from children to children, but they do need a quiet study space because like Hugh mentioned earlier, when they are doing their revision, they are looking through their mistakes, there's actually very heavy duty thinking ongoing. And if they are constantly being distracted, they don't have enough time to devote to their thinking. It actually takes them more time and more effort to achieve the same outcome. So it's important for us to provide that supportive environment for them that, gives them the space that they need to be with their thoughts.
Yeah.
And so these are some things. And then again with encouragement. And why do these things keep coming up? I think that's why we really need to collaborate. So on some days I do have parents sending me a class dojo message and they're telling me that they lost it at their kid.
Yeah.
And sometimes they want me to check on the children. And on days that we've had particularly challenging instances in class, sometimes with homework or with corrections, I also need to help. I need the parents to help remind the children that we are all trying to help them and support them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So besides providing all these things, we need to keep in mind why they keep coming up and how we can collaborate to support the children. Yeah. So finally, some practical exam strategies. So it's really important for the children to read the instructions, okay? And it's a habit that they need to calculate, even very simple things. For example, for our P5 children, okay, for mathematics in P5, they sit for 2 papers. And even though the instructions are very clearly labeled, all the time I have children asking me if they can use a calculator. Yeah, so these are things that they need to take note of, and they need to be able to use these tools to help them do better in their exam. Yeah. And then if they have any questions about the paper, they notice a mistake, it's really important for them to raise it up the first instance that they notice it, instead of carrying that anxiety and doubt with them throughout the exam. Yeah, and there's no penalty to asking. They just put up their hands,
Yep.
they ask a question, and if there's nothing wrong, the invigilator will just tell them that there's nothing wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then this one is the last one finally, it's my favorite, but I think it's very often misunderstood. So easy questions first, okay, in the exam. So we always tell the students to start with the questions that they find easier and that they can work on to build confidence. But I think how this is sometimes misinterpreted is students spend maybe 30 seconds on a question that they think is difficult, and then they just move on without trying or without doing anything. So as much as they want to attack the easy question first, it's important for them to attempt. Yeah, and not make a snap judgment. So in mathematics, it's the paper is really sort of ordered that way, where we start with MCQ and short answer questions and word problems. So it's important for them to balance answering easy questions first and managing their time in the paper. So they need to invest sufficient time in questions. And then when they decide that they can't do it, they need to move on and focus on the questions that they can. Yeah. So Hugh, how does this easy questions first apply in English?
Yeah, very similar to mathematics. The way the papers are actually designed is also from the simpler sections to the more difficult sections. So for, let's say, paper 2 in English, it always starts with grammar, multiple choice. So the first booklet one, is all multiple choice questions, but progressively it gets more challenging, right? So it starts with grammar, then it goes to vocabulary, then it goes to vocabulary close, then it goes to visual text. So progressively it gets more challenging. But the reason why we do this, again, like what Acing mentioned, is to build confidence. And also, you know what? These exams, right? They're all done early in the morning, and when they're in, and okay, going back to having enough sleep, so that's important, right? Also because it's early in the morning, right? And they need to, just like anything else, they need to warm up. Basically, they need to warm up their brains, right? So that's why, if they start with the easy ones first, and get warmed up a little, then when it comes to the more difficult questions, at least they are thinking fully at that point already. Yeah. Yeah, so totally I agree with what you said. It's the same for English. That's why comprehension always at the end, because that's usually the most difficult component in an English examination. Yeah.
All right, cool. So now we are on to our little tidbits from our curriculum that we'd like to share with everyone. So I'm going to go ahead with science, and our science specialist is not with us today, but if you guys have any questions, you can just drop by our centers or send us an email or even leave us a question in the Q&A section. Okay, so these are some of the science questions that we see in our science papers. So I think what we wanted to highlight is the use of bar graphs and line graphs. Yeah, and I'm just thinking off my head from a perspective of teaching mathematics. Sometimes when children look at these questions, they might not even have been taught bar graphs and line graphs in their math syllabus yet. But these questions are very common in mathematics. So it's important for children to know how to read the data and to use it in answering the question. So in science, the challenges that they face, okay, and parents, this is really good for you to take note of, is identifying the variables and linking the variables to the science concepts being tested. So when they look at a graph, it's not just about numbers. I would say in mathematics, it's very straightforward. The questions are who has more, who has less, but in science, they need to interpret the data and extract meaningful information from it. So some of the common challenges, okay, I've summarized for you is here. So they confuse the variables, they misinterpret the trends, and they overlook axis labels. Okay, and then the way to address these common challenges, okay, is when we look at this question and we look at the graph. Okay. they need to be able to identify the variables on the line graph. So here we have the rate of photosynthesis and the temperature of surrounding air. And even if they can identify the variables, they need to be able to differentiate between the change variable and the measured variable. Okay, so and besides that, they also need to combine the information in the question. So George conducted an experiment to investigate the effect of temperature. Okay, and the effect of temperature on photosynthesis in a particular plant. Okay, so when we look at the x-axis, okay, typically the x-axis represents the change variable, which in this case is the temperature of the surrounding air, whereas the y-axis represents the measured variable. Okay, so students must be able to correctly identify this. Okay, and apply their knowledge to answer the question. Okay, and even after they are able to identify the axis, change variable, and measure variable, they have to analyze the data and look at the upward trend, okay, and understand what that says about the relationship between the two variables. So parents, do you want to have a go? Maybe type your answer in the chat. When we understand which is the change variable, which is the measured variable, and we look at this graph, what does it tell us about the relationship between the two? Okay, I'll give you guys 30 seconds. And if you want to, you just type your answers in the chat.
Yeah. Let's see if we have any scientists in the webinar this evening.
Yeah, so yeah, I think it's really more complex than just read numbers of a graph.
Yeah.
All right, okay. Yeah, thanks for the responses, guys. Okay, so yep, some of you got it. Okay, I think some of us need a little more practice. When we look at this graph, we actually see that that there's an upward trend, and the upward trend indicates that as the temperature of the surrounding air increases, the rate of photosynthesis increases too. And I think it's easy because we are adults to arrive at that conclusion, but some of our children can interpret the graph as the temperature, as the rate of photosynthesis increases, it increases the temperature. So they could get it the other way around.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we see questions based on graph like that, it's really important. I think like we mentioned earlier, if they do a verbal revision with us, they could just say out what they see in the graph and then how they will answer the question. And then in that instance, it's easy for us to assess what they understand, what they are able to address in the question, and how they can improve the question without going through the trouble of having to write everything down and then after that mark it and do corrections. So in just 5 minutes, after they're done with their homework, you want to take out an exercise that they have done in class and they've gotten it wrong, you could just show it to them, look at this, what do you see, and how do you think you should answer. Yeah, so that's this for our science question. Okay, and then if we go back to some tips for interpreting graphs. Okay, so like we mentioned, it's important for them to identify the axis and then recognize which are the change and measured variables. Okay, then they also have to think about the relationship between the two variables and use the graph to support their answers. Yeah, okay. And if you have any further questions about our science curriculum, you could feel free to drop by our centers. Okay, and now I have like the thing that I'm most excited about. It's our math curriculum. Okay, so these are some samples of math questions that the children face. Okay, so again, parents, I'd like to invite you right now. When you look at these three questions, what are you thinking? What are some similarities and differences that you see between these questions? And any idea how you solve these questions? Okay, so if we look at all three questions, we have Ellie and Beth in all three. And then there's always a point in time where they have equal number. Yes, Royce, thank you. They are all model questions.
Yes.
And when we look at these questions, then do our children know what are the different models that they need to draw to solve these questions? Because they all sound the same. It's all about marbles and stickers, and they're giving and taking, and then it's always as much as, those are information in the question that they can pick up on very easily, but they struggle to solve. And so the way that we help them, okay, in our teaching is, first of all, we provide a structure so that they know how to approach the question. So we always teach them to read closely in class. I tell them to read the questions twice, and then they underline the keywords, they identify the different concepts and decide on an approach. Okay, so an approach could be heuristics, they draw a model. Sometimes they could, if they have enough stationery, they could act it out at their desk to show the giving and taking. Okay, and then some children, instead of drawing a model, they draw a diagram. And at the higher levels, P5 especially, they could use ratio or fractions to help them solve. Okay, so now I'm going to show you what it looks like in class and how I'll help the children solve one of these questions. Okay, so I'm going to change my share screen around. Okay. So okay, so if you can see my share screen, it's actually my iPad. I'm going to write a little. You can just help me out, give me a thumbs up, that would be great. Okay, so this is something that we see in class, and then like I mentioned, okay, we have the three questions, okay, and then we teach the kids to read the questions twice and to highlight the statements that shows the different concepts, what's happening before, what's happening in the change, what's happening in the after. Okay, and then after that, they can decide if they want to draw a model. So like some of you have already said, we are going to draw a model, okay, and I'm only going to go through the third question. Okay, so if we look at that, we have Ellie had $120 and Beth had twice as much money as Ellie at first. She received some, Ellie received some money and Beth spent some money. The amount that Ellie received was 2 times as much as the amount Beth spent. And they had the same amount of money in the end. How much did Ellie receive? Okay, so again, if we are back to revising and practice, okay, if they have gotten this question wrong previously, then I will ask them, what would they change? What would they do differently to answer this question? If they're stuck and then they're doing this for the first time, they have no idea how to carry on. Okay, so I'll tell them, why don't you highlight the keywords first? What's the information that you could use in the question? And then from there, I'll ask them, so do you want to draw a model, or do you just want to start? Do you want to add? Do you want to subtract? And then based on whatever they answer, then my question would be, what do those numbers represent? What will your answer tell you? Yeah. So in class, the way that I help them, if I have a whole class of them, first, I'll tell them that we are going to draw the model, and then we are going to put in as much information as we can into the model. So first we see that Ellie had $120 and Bev had twice as much. Okay, so we have $120 and twice as much. So here we already have Ellie and then we have Bev and twice as much. So I know that, okay, this would be $120. This is another 120. This is another 120. So we have twice as much. Okay, and then Ellie is going to receive some money and Beth is going to spend some money. Okay, so I know that, okay, in my conversation with the children, okay, I'm going to tell them what's going to happen to Ellie's bar. So parents, what's going to happen to Ellie's bar? Okay, yes, it's going to grow longer. Okay, and then Beth's bar is going to become shorter because she's spending. Okay, and then parents, from our experience, what do the children do when they do this? What are the challenges that they face? They're going to say they don't know how to draw this because how do they show 2 units and 1 unit? Okay, because Ellie received 2 times as much as the amount that Beth spent. Okay, and then the crux to helping them is really to remind them of the steps they can take to solve these questions. Like, have you used all the information? Have you put all the information into your model? Have you really used everything you can use? So something that they need to pay attention to is that in the end, they had the same amount of money. So if I want both of them to end here, okay, where they have an equal amount of money, and then I'm going to extend Ellie's bar, and I'm going to take away from Beth's. Okay. And if I use the information, the amount that Ellie received was 2 times as much as the amount Beth spent, I would know that this is 2 units and this is 1 unit. And this is the most magical part of mathematics for me, is when we draw it like that, what do you see? Okay, thank you. So some of you see it, okay, you've gotten it. So just now we already mentioned that this is $120. This is another $120. And this is another $120. So when we draw the model like this, the children get to see that 3 units is $120. Okay. And then from here, they'll be able to solve for 1 unit when they take $120 divided by 3, and that's 40. And then now they have to solve. And okay, this is really a heads up. A lot of them stop at 1 unit because they think they're done. But it's really important for them to go back to the question to say how much did Ellie receive. So we know that Ellie received 2 units. So we're actually looking for 2 units. So there's going to be 40 times 2. So that's 80. Okay, so that's our answer. So if we are back to the secrets to helping our children score in their exam, it's really in all the collaboration and then in the preparation before the exam, in helping them remember everything that they've learned. And if they've forgotten, we can remind them in a stress-free and normal tone of voice.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's everything I have for science and mathematics. Hugh,
Yeah.
something for
Okay.
English.
Cool. Yeah. So I know we're running a little late here. Give me 5 minutes, okay? Just 5 minutes, and I'll share with you something that we do in our English class, okay? So let me just share my screen as well, and I hope this works. Okay, I really hope everyone can see my screen. Yeah, you think is that good?
Yep.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so one of the problems, okay, I wouldn't say problems, but one of the most difficult sections in any English exam would be the comprehension, right? So what we like to do here at the Eton Academy is to teach them strategies to deal with long text and understanding long text, like comprehension text, for example. Okay. So what we do is we use something called the RACER technique, right? Now, RACER is just an acronym, right? So the first R stands for read. So when I say read, I don't mean just read it and yeah, try to make sense of it. No, when we talk about reading, we're talking about reading closely. So what does that mean? It means that as we are reading, we ask questions. Okay, so what kind of questions do we ask? Basically, the who, what, where, when, how, right? These types of questions, right? So as we read things, these are the natural questions that come to our mind. Okay, so let me just give you an example of how we do a close reading. Then I'll go into a question that the children would probably see in the paper. Okay, so in this case, right, the moonlit sea was unusually calm on the bitterly cold night of 17 February 1864, when a watchman spotted a strange, partially submerged shape gliding steadily towards the side of the Union sloop of war, Housatonic. Okay, so there's a bit going on there, right? Okay, first question probably they'll be wondering is, what is this partially submerged shape gliding steadily, right? They'll be wondering, what is this? Okay. So as we are reading, we are actively annotating and asking questions. Okay. Because the whole idea here is to find the answers through our reading. So once they actually are able to read very closely and find answers as they're reading, when it comes to the comprehension questions, right, it'll be a lot simpler for them because they pretty much already figured out the answers as they're reading, you know? Right. The other question probably would be this one. What is this about? What's the Union sloop of war Housatonic? What is this, right? Okay, so we'll read on to find out. The steam-powered warship was one of the Union's biggest, best armed vessels. Okay, all right. So now we kind of figured this out. It's a steam-powered warship. All right. So what we do is we link. So again, what is this? And then we link this to the information we have in the text, right? So annotating the different passages and different text is actually a very useful tool, right, for students. Because again, as I mentioned, right, when they come to the question, sometimes when they finish reading, right, then they come to the questions, then it's like they forget and then they just have to read everything again. But if we are actively annotating, it really helps them to focus on some bits of information, right? Especially if you're annotating points by the side. Okay, right. So let me just continue for a bit. It took a few minutes for the officer on the of the deck, John Crosby, to comprehend what he was seeing. Right. By the time he did, it was too late. Okay. So maybe a question that they'll be asking as they read this is, why was it too late? Right. Why was it too late? What happened? Right. Let me continue. The swiftly moving craft that passed under the Housatonic's guns and the small arms fire now directed at it by the men on deck bounced harmlessly off its iron hull. Okay, so by reading that next bit, we learn that this swiftly moving craft, again, we're still not quite sure what it is, all right? But, that might come a bit later, yeah? It actually had gone under the guns of that steamed warship, right? And the small arms fire now, directed it by the men on deck, bounced harmlessly off its iron hull. So a question that probably we ask the students as they're reading, what does this mean by bouncing harmlessly? So essentially we can say something like, it had no effect. So their firearms had no effect on the whatever that moving craft was, whatever that swift moving craft was. Okay, so when we talk about reading, we talk about reading closely and asking questions as they read. Okay, so this is one of the strategies that we use. Okay, let me just continue from here. So what we like to do as well is to get them to think differently. So sometimes you throw in the question and we'll put in an answer which is not quite correct, right? So this is something that we like to do because we like them to think, not just think about, okay, what's the right answer? Maybe look at the answer, look at it in a different way. Is this wrong? Okay, why is this wrong? Right? So another part of that RACER acronym is to analyze the questions. Okay, so what do we mean by that? When we read the question, so the question here is, why do you think it was too late by the time John Crosby comprehended what he was seeing? The first step is to identify what is the subject. So the subject here is John Crosby, so we box that up. Okay, and then the next thing is to know the tense of the question. I think it's important that they realize what tense to write their answers in. Okay, so the tense marker here is the word was, so we know it's in the past tense. So when they write the answer, it also has to be in the past tense, right? And the last step would be to highlight the keywords. So we will also highlight the question word, okay, why. And the reason why we do that is because if it's a why question, we know that the response needs to provide a reason, right? So again, it's associating the question with the answer here. If I ask you why, you have to provide a reason. Simple as that, right? Okay, other keywords would probably be too late, right? Comprehended what he was seeing, right? So these are the keywords in this question, okay? So the answer given here is it took a few minutes for the officer of the deck, John Crosby, to comprehend what he was seeing. Now, if you look at this response here, is this really answering the question? If I say, why do you think it was too late? It says it took a few minutes. That doesn't tell me that it's too late. A few minutes can be fast. Depends on what was going on, right? Okay, so understanding the question is really important. Analyzing the question is really important, and then that's how they will be able to identify the points to give in their answer. And of course, the other thing to take note of is the mark allocation as well. Okay, so for comprehension, if it's worth 2 marks, right, that would probably mean that they need to put in at least 2 points. Okay, if it's 1 mark, it's just 1 point. So these are the strategies and the things that we discuss in class so that they are, very familiar with the exam or with the mode of exam, right? Okay, so just very quickly, I'll just share the answer here. Okay, so the answer shared just now was wrong, and the right answer should be that, okay, it had already passed under the guns of the Housatonic. So that is something we saw in the text too, right? So why it was too late, we identified that already, right? And the men on board could only direct small arms fire at it, but it was actually ineffective. So again, going back to the 2 mark allocation, if I mention that it passed under the guns, that's just 1 point. So what if they pass under the guns, right? The next point, of course, is that what they were doing, they were shooting at the craft. By the way, it's a submarine, just in case you're wondering. So they were shooting at it, and it was basically ineffective. Yeah. So when we talk about comprehension, okay, going back to what I said earlier on, the most important thing is reading closely, and this is a skill that they must practice doing. Okay. Many children are very happy just to read quickly and then get down to it. Reading closely is so important. And I got to say that, as Eating was talking about the maths questions as well, I realized that actually it's also understanding the language of maths questions, right? And that has to do with reading closely as well, recognizing certain things. Yeah. So when it comes to comprehension, all I got to say is read closely. And how do we do that? We annotate as we read, we ask questions as we read, and we figure out answers as we read. That's the method that we use here. Okay. All right. So thank you for indulging me for those few minutes. Let me just stop my share right now. Yes. Okay. So thank you very much for attending this evening. Now, if there are any questions, anything you need to clarify, or just general questions you might have, please feel free to put it in the Q&A or even in the chat. We'll try to respond as fast as we can. Otherwise, Eating, do you have anything else to share with them?
Yeah, I actually have something small at the
Right.
end. Yeah. Let's see.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so right now we are having a trial. Okay, if you sign up for one, you get a complimentary one. And I think one reason why I really like to see some of our children in class is because we are focusing on exam prep, and at the end of each term, we do have a number of review papers to help us understand where the children are and how we can help them better.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you'd like to join us in class, please scan the QR code and then we will see you at one of our centers.
Mhm.
Yep, so I think Hugh and I are going to hang around here. If you have any questions, you can just send it to us through the chat or through the Q&A. Otherwise, that's all we have for tonight. Hugh, do you have anything else?
No, once again, thank you very much for turning up this evening. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you and your children at our centers. Yeah. Okay. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. All the best for your exam prep.
Yeah.
All right, thanks so much, parents. I see that most of you have gone off. Okay, if you guys have any questions, I think this is pretty much your last 30 seconds to scan the QR code for the trial class. Otherwise, you could always send us an email. We'll really get on that, okay, as soon as we hear from you. Otherwise, I think we are going to end the webinar now. All right, thanks everyone. Good night.
you.
Thanks you. See ya.
Bye. See you.